How many of you believe today? Do you believe what God says about you? Or do you look at your weaknesses and think, that's who I am? Do you believe that God shows His strength in your weakness today? A couple of people over here. Let me tell you what. I believe today that we need to see ourselves as God sees us. And when we do, our trials, everything that we go through will change because our perspective will change. Today we're going to be talking about building our faith. Now, building our faith takes training. Any of you ever trained for a sport? Okay. You know, right now, Lisa and I have decided that it's, especially me, my pants are getting tighter. Last Sunday was Super Bowl Sunday, and who won? Okay. While the Chiefs were training and all of that to get ready for Super Bowl Sunday, I wasn't. And so I had a Miami Dolphins shirt that I was going to wear, and I put it on, and I realized I couldn't wear it here because it was way too tight. And I realized that I need to start training again. I need to start working out and start to lose weight. So Lisa and I this week have started back working out and everything. So I am sore. And when I'm working out, I am miserable. Okay? So when I'm on the treadmill, I just can't wait for the treadmill to be done. And I was on the Stairmaster yesterday, and I walked I went up 103 floors, not 103 flights, but 103 floors I went up. And when I got done, and I could barely walk. Okay, and I realized that training is not fun. Training is hard work, and sometimes it hurts. But the more we train, the better we get. Amen? The more we train, the less the muscles hurt. We got done working out on Thursday, I believe it was, and Lisa, I was filling up my water bottle, and Lisa says, "Hey, this is exciting. Give me a fist bump." And I had to go, "Okay, hang on." Okay? It was just painful. I mean, just to give her a fist bump. Now, after I got home and got cleaned up and everything, the pain started going away. But, this morning, I am a little bit stiff and I am a little bit sore. But God has called me to take care of His temple, His body, and I am doing that, okay? And God has called us to build our faith, but to build our faith, we need to get into training. And you know what? Building our faith usually means that He takes us out of where we feel we're strong, and He puts us where we feel we're weak so that He can show His strength through us. Don't you love it when He does that? Don't you love it when He goes, "I know you don't like doing this, or you're very, very, feel like you can't do it very well, but that's where I want you." I don't like it when He does that. Okay? I mean, when He does that, I think, okay. But that's when we find out that God is strong and He works through us. It's through our weaknesses that we are made strong. Listen to this. Jesus said to me, this is the Apostle Paul speaking, "My grace is sufficient for you. My grace is just enough for you. Not for tomorrow, not for 5 hours from now. My grace is just enough for you right now in this moment. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. This is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Oh, I love that. You know what? God is not limited by our limitations. Because if He was limited by our limitations, I wouldn't be here today. For the way I saw myself, I couldn't have stood up here and had anything to say of any consequence whatsoever. It is through God's strength that each and every one of us are here. And where you see your limitations, God sees possibilities. Whenever He calls us to step out of our comfort zone, it is because He wants to do something in and through us. But as we sang earlier, we have to surrender. I surrender all. Now, here's a question for you. How do we increase our trust in God's strength when it seems our weaknesses capture our attention? You ever felt that way? Let me throw something out there. God wants you to be His witnesses. But most of you here today feel that's a weakness for you. Most of you here today would say, wait a minute, you know, I'm called to pray. Okay? I'm called to pray. I'm not called to be a witness because I don't know what to say. Oh, wait a minute. My power is made perfect in weakness. So what you consider your weakness, if you are really trusting God and surrendering yourself to Him, then that's where God is going to make His strength shine through you. So how you doing so far? Have I stepped on enough toes? When's the last time you talked to somebody? When you told them what God has done for you? When's the last time you've done anything like that? And if you're saying, I can't, I say, whoo, that's good news. Because you can't, but God can. And God said, it is in your weakness that I am strong. You want me to keep stepping on your toes? Well, here we go, okay? So, God has called us to step out of our comfort zones, and all we look at is our weaknesses. But the question is, how can we trust God's strength even when we're looking at our weaknesses? That seems to all that comes into focus. Well, we're going to turn to Peter. Peter's training. Jesus trained Peter for 3.5 years. And even at the end of his training, when Jesus was on the cross, Peter was still learning. After Jesus was killed and rose again, Peter was still being trained. But we're going to talk about Peter's training while Jesus was alive, okay? We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 is where we're going to be. So what we have here is the disciples were getting nowhere. They had been pushed off ashore, and they were in the water. There was a storm now. And they're out in the middle of the storm without Jesus, because Jesus sent them out alone. They were sent out there to what they thought they needed most, a little rest and solitude. I mean, there's a lot going on in their lives. They just learned that John the Baptist had been executed. Herod had him beheaded. Jesus had led the disciples to withdraw to a quiet place, but the people found out where they were, and they all gathered around. And the Bible tells us there were 5,000 men, besides the women and the children there. And Jesus tells his disciples, hey, why don't you go get some food for these people? And they laughed at him. And Jesus, trying to show them who he was, said, bring me what you have. And so they brought him 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus fed 5,000 men, plus all of the women and children there, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And when that miracle was complete, Jesus told his disciples to get into the boat and go to the other side to Capernaum. And now, in the boat, with a storm raging, they're straining against the oars with every muscle they have. Can you imagine what was going through Peter's mind? I wish Jesus were here. I wish he hadn't stayed behind to pray. I mean, I wish Jesus knew what we were going through. Because if Jesus knew what we were going through, maybe he could do something. I mean, I can see that. I think that's where we all have been at some point in our lives. And then they look up, and who do they see? They see Jesus walking to them in the midst of the storm on the water. Let's pick up the story there, Matthew 14, starting in verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. I love that. I love that. You know, one thing you can say about Peter, he was all in. Okay? I mean, there were 12 disciples in that boat. Only one jumped out of it. The rest of them were like, go ahead, Peter. I want to see what happens, okay? And Peter is all in. He's like, okay, if it's you, Jesus, here I am. I want to come to you. I love it. But there was a problem. When Peter saw the wind and the waves, and he realized that all there was under his feet was water that he shouldn't be able to walk on. And he took his eyes off of Jesus. He started to fear and began to sink. But even in Peter's failure, he knew exactly what to do. Listen. He cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Well, why did he doubt? I mean, he had just seen the day before Jesus feed 5,000 men and all the women and children with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Why did he doubt? He's seen all the miracles. But the miracles that he had seen the day before did not outweigh the fears that he saw today. You ever been there? God's moved in your life in miraculous ways, but something's happened to you today, and those things are behind you, and all you can see is what is before you. And it causes fear in your life. If you can't relate to that, I'll have an altar call. Because I believe we all can. You see, for Peter, the danger of drowning was real. And in a surge of enthusiastic faith, he jumps out of the boat to walk to Jesus. He has his eyes fixed on Jesus. But somewhere along the line, he gets lost. All the miracles that he had seen, he forgets. The miracle that he was walking on the water at that point, when his eyes were fixed on Jesus, eludes him. And he starts to sink because he becomes afraid. And Jesus is going to use this as a training moment in Peter's life. And that's exactly why we need storms in our lives. Storms become the training ground for our faith. Storms become the training ground to grow our faith. If we allow them. You realize that untested faith is fragile. Untested faith isn't worth much. It won't hold up under the storms of life. I'm going to tell you, it was no coincidence that the storm just happened to occur when the disciples were in the boat alone and Jesus was on the land praying to God. It is no coincidence that the storm happened to occur on the heels of the miracles of loaves and bread and fish. You see, Jesus is omniscient, all-knowing, and he chose to be on land when this storm came in the disciples' life. He knew what was going to happen, and he chose not to be there. And he chose his words carefully when he spoke to Peter, when Peter sank. You of little faith, why did you doubt? You see, Jesus used Peter's moment of weakness as a teaching moment. Let me show you how. We're going to jump to Mark. It's Mark chapter 6. It's Mark's version, what he saw happening at this time. Mark chapter 6, verse 51 and 52 says this. Then Jesus climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Wait a minute. We're talking about a storm here that was going on. Jesus walking on the water, Peter walking on the water, Peter sinking, and all of a sudden he goes back to the loaves. You see, Jesus was trying to teach them through the fish and the loaves about his deity, how he was God, and he was all-powerful. He could do anything. But the disciples did not understand. Their hearts were still hard. And so Jesus had to use something else to teach them. They had not understood about the loaves. They had not grasped who Jesus really was. And thus, the omnipotence or the unlimited power over the physical world that Jesus had, they did not understand. So we jump back to Matthew chapter 14, starting with verse 32. And when Peter and Jesus climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." You see the training happening here? Now let's stop here just a minute, okay? They could have learned this lesson through the loaves and the fish, but they didn't. Their hearts were hard. They did not understand. And it took a storm, a literal storm, a physical storm, for them to understand who Jesus was. The storm had done its work. The storm was Jesus training his disciples. Trials in our lives are the ultimate training exercise for our faith. The powerful message that we hear is found in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Oh, don't you just love that? I mean, take a look at that. Consider it pure joy. Hey, if you're going through a storm, if you're going through a difficult time, jump up and down and say, "Whoo, I really like this. Whoopee!" And this is the half-brother of Jesus, James, talking. And I'm like, really? Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Now let's stop. Why should we consider it pure joy? Because it is the testing of our faith. All the trials that we go through are testing our faith and making our faith stronger in Him. It is showing our weaknesses for what they are, and in our weaknesses, God is being shown for who He is. All-powerful, all-knowing. And His strength can be seen in our weakness. Consider it pure joys, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I love that. The powerful message of this verse is clear. Bad news can be faced with great hope. Storms, trials may be faced with joy. Whether your trials come as a result of your own brokenness or poor choices, or the choices of someone else, or an act of nature. Here in Kansas, we call those tornadoes. Or the consequence of living in a fallen world. We have reason to be joyful, even in our grief and our hurting. The reason? Because trials test our faith. They show us our weakness. And when we see our weaknesses, is that a bad thing? No. Each and every one of us has weaknesses. There's not one of us that doesn't have weaknesses, okay? And when we have those weaknesses, sometimes God is working on us to take those out of our lives. And sometimes God is using our weaknesses to show His strength. But I want you to notice in these verses, it's not God's work alone. There are two words here that we need to look at. It says consider and let. We are to consider it pure joy. This requires us to make a deliberate choice, a deliberate decision about how we view the trial we are going through. That means that I have a choice to make. I can grumble and complain, or I can see it for what it is, a chance for me to grow spiritually, for my faith to become stronger. And then we must let perseverance do its work by working with God, not against Him. When we go through trials, many times we work against God. You know, our prayers become something like this: Lord, get me out of this mess. Been there? Mm-hmm. Lord, why me? That's working against God. When you say, why me? Let me ask you this, why not you? Why should it be somebody else? Who better to go through a difficult time than you, because you have Jesus on your side? We need to work with God, not against Him when we face our trials. You know, we, just like Peter, have choices to make when we face life's trials. What did Peter do? He reached for Jesus. You know what? He could have sunk and been mad and then tried to swim back to the boat on his own because he was angry that Jesus let him sink. What kind of God is this Jesus that He would let me sink? But that's not what Peter did. Peter cried out to Jesus and reached for Him. And you all know what happened next, right? Jesus immediately calmed the storm and made everything all right. No. Here's the problem, okay? He reached out and he grabbed Peter by the hand, but there were more tests, there were more trials, there were obstacles, there were hurdles. Peter had to walk with Jesus through the storm, all the way to the boat and then crawl inside the boat before Jesus calmed the storm. And that's the way it is in our lives many times. Too many times we cry out to Jesus and we want him to calm the storm. And Jesus reaches out and takes us by the hand and says, let me walk you through this storm. Let me walk you through it. Because there's lessons to be learned as you go through this storm. And sometimes we get angry. And we're mad at God because we're going through this storm. We're mad at God and we don't want to go through the storm. And when he doesn't calm it immediately, we grit our teeth. But the one thing that we need to understand is we're going through our storms. If we cry out to Jesus and we reach out to him, he uses every trial to build our strength and our endurance in our faith. Every trial. This is why Jesus, knowing that within hours he would be arrested, flogged, paraded through the streets, and crucified, said the following words to us. All this have I told you, so that you will not fall away. They will put some of you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming when anyone who kills you will think they're offering a service to God. They will do such things because they have not known the Father or me. I have told you this so that when their time comes, you will remember that I warned you about them. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Those are the words of Jesus. Do you hear him? Take heart. I've overcome the world. When you're going through this difficult time firsthand, maybe it's time that you say, greater is he that is in me than he that is in this world. Between the disciples and Jesus that night, when the storm was raging and Jesus was on land, there was darkness, danger, and distance. And even fear. You ever been there? Your storm is raging and Jesus doesn't seem to be there. Well, take a look at this. Jesus knows when you are in trouble, when you've had enough, when you need strength and courage. He knows when to calm the storm and when to ride it out with you. Jesus knows. So climb out of the boat. Climb out of the boat in the storm. Fix your eyes on Jesus. And if you falter, if you fall, cry out to him. Reach out to him. And know that he will catch you. He will pick you up. He may not calm the storm right then, but he will walk you through the storm until it's over. And he will step into your weaknesses with his strength if you allow him. So I thought, since we were studying Peter, maybe it'd be nice to end this sermon with the words of Peter himself. This is 1 Peter, starting chapter 1, verse 6. Peter says, "So be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. You love him, even though you have never seen him. Though you do not see him now, you trust him, and you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. The reward for trusting him will be the salvation of your souls." Peter was trained well. He learned through the storms that he went through. And he became a leader in the church. As the storms go through your life, what will you do? Will you let God work on your weaknesses? Even if you caused them yourself? Will you let God send his strength into your life? Take a moment with your heads bowed and your eyes closed. Many of you may be going through a trial right now. And many of you may be going through a trial that you have caused yourself. Maybe you didn't cause it, but you're still going through a storm. It's time to see God for who he is and see yourself as God sees you. And let God use this storm to grow your faith in him.